All right, guys, this one's going deep, real deep, and it's got some very important concepts in it that are important to understand, because every video I make about economics going forward is going to be under the assumption that you understand the concepts I'm explaining in this video. So this is definitely like, necessary starter material that you need to know. So I'm going to explain the way modern economics work and why it's really fucked up, okay? So I got to start in 1914 during the First World War, when the United States created what is referred to as fractional reserve banking. Now, some of you might already know what this is, but the United States doesn't actually make its own dollar. It borrows money from the Federal Reserve at an interest rate. And they loan the money based on a fractional reserve system, which means that they only need to have a portion of the money that they loan out. So if they want to loan the US government $10 million so that there is $10 million in existence, then they only have to have, say, $1 million. So let me explain to you what happened the very first time this ever happened, okay? So the United States wants $1 million. They borrow $1 million from the from the Federal Reserve at a, let's say, 5% interest rate. The very first time that interest rate turned over, you now have $1,050,000 worth of debt. But there is only $1 million of US money in existence. So what this means is that there is now more debt than there is money in the world. And this never stopped. This has continued to happen year over year, month after month, day after day. This is why the world is so much in debt and nobody's got any money, yet everybody owes, billions of dollars or trillions of dollars. This is why, okay? There is more debt in the world than there is money. If you took every single dollar in existence, put it towards every single dollar of debt, there would still be money owing. There would still be debt, but there'd be no money, okay? So money is all a joke for all intents and purposes. Like, it is, but it isn't. I mean, I think you get my point. All right. So more so in the 60s or 70s, when Richard Nixon was president, we moved away from a gold-backed dollar to a fiat currency. Now, before, if you wanted to make money, even though you were borrowing it from the fractional reserve, you had to have, or the Federal Reserve, you had to have enough money in gold in the treasury to be allowed to get that money printed off. Whereas Richard Nixon created a fiat currency system, which is a debt-based currency for anybody who has credit, like a mortgage or a car payment or anything. You understand that you probably don't have enough money up front to pay for these things, but you have a consistent income coming in, and you can use that income as justification to borrow the money, because as long as you've got the income coming, you can make your payments. The company will make their money off of the product that they sell you, whether it be a car or a house, plus they'll make additional money off of the interest. And as long as that income is there, then the amount of debt doesn't really matter, right? Like, it's all about debt to income ratios, right? And there's that magic 35 to 40% number. If you want to get approved for a mortgage, you got to be 42% or lower, right? This is why they don't care about how much money you have. They care about how much income you have in comparison to how much debt you have. So now I'm going to use this and I'm going to translate this to like the national debt. Okay. So ever since Trudeau came in office, I've heard so many conservatives become debt hawks. You know what I mean? Deficit hawks. They're so concerned about the debt. Our children are going to be paying this debt. Our grandchildren are going to be paying this debt. Sidebar, 70% of our debt comes from two prime ministers. Conservative Stephen Harper, conservative Brian Mulroney. It is an empty criticism, but not because of that. The reason why it's an empty criticism is because we will never be out of debt. Ever. It'll never happen. There's more debt than there is money. All right. So what matters is not how much debt we have. What matters is how much income we have in comparison to our debt. The more debt we have, the more money we have to make in interest payments. And those interest payments have to be made first before we can spend any more government money on programs like healthcare or education or the military or anything, right? The interest has to be paid first. So the problem with rising the debt is the interest becomes higher and higher. We've got less money left over for our own programs, what we want to spend our money on. But if by running a government deficit, you generate more tax revenue than the increase in your interest payments, then you're actually better off. So I'm going to repeat that because this is the most important part of this video, okay? If I raise the debt by $10 billion and that raises my interest payments by $1 billion, but the things I spent that $10 billion on make me bring in $2 billion of tax revenue more a year, then I have $1 billion left over as additional money to spend on government programs. All right? So a deficit is not necessarily a bad thing. It's why you run the deficit, how you run the deficit, and how that deficit translates to economic growth. Okay, so whenever you hear somebody going on like, oh my God, Justin Trudeau is putting us in debt and this is so horrible and our children are going to be paying it, our grandchildren are going to be paying it. No, they're not. We're going to continue to pay our interest payments. The debt is always going to go up. There will always be more debt in the world than there is money. And what matters is how much money we got left over to spend on ourselves at the end of the day. So don't just look at a deficit and be like, oh my God, this is horrible. Don't look at a balanced budget and just assume that it's good, because you also got to look at, are you still growing the economy while you're running that balanced budget? Because if you're not, then it ain't a good thing, right? But yeah, don't buy into the deficit fear mongering or the debt fear mongering. You got to look at the debt to GDP ratio. And in terms of Canada, at least for the last 4 years, that has gotten better every single year. So yes, we are better off now than we were in 2015, even with higher debt, because ultimately the economy has grown a lot faster than our debt has. Now, we run in a boom bust cycle, right? So there's always caveats to this. We might be running up the debt now. The economic growth might happen now. You know, there could be a crash in the economy. We still have the debt, but the economy shrinks, right? So I'm not saying that it's the be all end all. These last 4 years have been fantastic. I'm just asking you to use your head a little bit and don't just automatically assume that a deficit is a bad thing or that debt is a bad thing when it comes to the government, because the reality is there's more debt than there is money. It's all funny money. It's all monopoly money. And honestly, the whole system's probably going to come crashing down in a couple hundred years when there's, you know, absolutely exorbitant amounts of debt and no money left, because interest just creates debt and is a faulty system with no actual production of value. But anyway, this is really important. Without this, you know, a lot of people can get manipulated into worrying about economics and yeah. So, I mean, this is just everything going forward. I'm going to assume that you understand these concepts, because I'm not just going to be treating every dollar of debt like it's a bad thing, because it isn't. All right. Have a good one. Keep it real. I'm going to work.